As telcos build out their 5G networks and move more towards more cloud-oriented architectures, access to capital for infrastructure builds becomes ever more important. But what are the options for network operators? Well, I'm talking today to Amy Wettenhall, Associate Director at the Macquarie Group, about this topic. So, Amy, can you give us a quick overview of Macquarie and your role there?
Hi, Ray. So Macquarie is a large financial services organisation. We're present in 31 markets globally, and we have over 16,000 employees. And apart from being an investment bank with an A-rated balance sheet, we're also a huge investor in infrastructure and assets. And in fact, we're the largest private owner of infrastructure globally. So we have many divisions. The division that I work in specialises in active assets rather than passive assets. And typically the lifespan of the assets that I work with is less than 12 years, and they're often widely dispersed geographically. So clearly there's a huge applicability there within telco, media and tech. And as you know, I came from industry. I've spent a long time in senior commercial roles on both the buy and sell side. So I understand the challenges that the ecosystem as a whole faces commercially and financially. And ultimately my role at Macquarie is to channel those challenges through a financial lens and come up with solutions for the market and the entire ecosystem.
Okay, so speaking of those solutions, it looks like Macquarie is aiming to bring a subscription model to communications networking for telcos and enterprises. Is that accurate?
It is. And with every generation of technology, we have seen from day dot a shift in business models. Look at the impact that X as a service had on the market in terms of OPEX models. I remember the days where software was node-based and perpetual licensing was the standard commercial model. The cloud has obviously shifted that dynamic towards a more recurrent revenue stream for software. And with 5G and the evolution of 5G, and indeed the widening of the customer landscape with 5G, we see that there are some significant challenges that poses the industry in terms of how to best deploy their capital to deliver the solutions and receive the benefits of that technology. And if we look at the supply side, and the challenges exist on both sides, there's balance sheet constraints across the board. We all know the impact Corona has had economically on all the industry players. But suppliers have a number of distinct challenges themselves. It's an increasingly competitive market, as we know, and often suppliers are forced to heavily discount or provide extended payment terms, which they're able to offer, and they do where they can, but clearly they're not able to do that at scale at a global level for all customers. Equally, as an industry, we all need to be empathetic that continual development of the technology is critical. 5G is in its infancy, isn't it? And what we will see is 5G being deployed initially, and then the use cases will be refined. Their applications across the many verticals and sectors it will be deployed into will be refined, and technology evolution will need to continue. And for suppliers, that means a necessary requirement to achieve a cash flow into R&D to continue to develop. So the supply side themselves have challenges that they're facing in that sense. When we look at the customer landscape, and indeed the customer landscape's changed quite dramatically with 5G. You've now got a unique scenario where operators are both a B2B as a supplier and a B2B as a customer. And equally, we have a huge plethora of enterprises out there that are looking to consume this technology, whether it's for revenue generation or for operational efficiency. But indeed, enterprises and operators themselves struggle in terms of working capital, availability of capital to deploy for innovations that may not get a return on investment immediately. So the solutions that we've come up with are typically subscription-like in that they have two distinct characteristics that we believe the market needs to react to those challenges. And the first is affording suppliers the ability to be paid during implementation, and equally for customers to not have to fund that implementation themselves, but be paid on a monthly basis post-implementation. Now, if you look at that through the lens of an actual project, how does that work? And from a financial perspective, there's many varied models in terms of the structures, that we would deploy, and that would very much depend on the customer need and the supplier need. But let's think of a typical telco project. The implementation phase, let's say for a private network, could be 6 to 12 months. As we know, for a radio deployment or a core network evolution, it can be much longer. And during that time period, we have standard milestones that we typically see in the majority of our telco contracts. So suppliers will need to outlay OPEX for design. They'll need to purchase third-party hardware and implement it. They'll go through testing, many phases of testing, certainly, stability, and then finally they'll reach that final acceptance, which is the trigger point for the customer to start to generate revenue from that infrastructure. So our solution holds firm to the first principle, which is that those suppliers should be paid during implementation, and we provide funding in order to achieve that. Post-implementation, there's many models that we can deploy depending on the customer need. So typically, a customer might start to generate revenue immediately. What we'll typically, I think, see more in the enterprise space is that there will be a ramp up of that benefits realization. Once you deploy a 5G private network, for example, you're not going to be able to make all the operational process changes on day one to get the operational efficiency or the revenue generation that you're looking for. So we can deploy a flexible model dependent on that customer need, such that they pay a fixed monthly charge over the duration of the contract life cycle. And that's essentially the model at its simplest form, and that we're working on with our customers, and it's being received really well in the market.
Okay, so this is shifting CapEx pretty much over to the OPEX side. What does that mean for network operator economics? And are there accounting and tax implications of going down this route for the network operator?
Look, it's a really good question. Accounting and tax implications have since forever been really important, particularly for telco deals. Historically, telco deals are often multi-party deals, they're often multi-geography deals, and with that comes regulatory requirements, multiple stakeholders with their own governance priorities. I think if we look at, is the accounting and tax implications here more difficult than in a standard telco deal? No, they don't have to be. And in actual fact, working with Macquarie, our customers find hugely beneficial because we have so many tax and accounting experts that can work through the specific priorities those customers and suppliers may have.
And so I can, thinking from the network operator side, there's a lot of this that sounds attractive, but what operators are trying to get away from more and more is getting locked into stuff. So, I mean, what kind of timescales are we looking at here? If an operator was to go to Macquarie and say, yes, I like the sound of the subscription model, this is going to help me out in a number of different ways, how long are they going to have to, buy into this kind of contract, this kind of arrangement?
The good news is it depends. It depends on a number of factors. So we will typically work with our customers to understand a number of different inputs. So their specific technology architecture roadmap will play a role. The natural life cycle of those assets will play a role. Their plans for evolution, their plans for refresh of the network will also play a role. And interestingly, in my job, coming from industry, I spend just as much time with CTOs as I do CFOs tackling just these topics. But there is no fixed timescale. Every deal is different, and we work with the customers to mould the right structure for the term that they're looking for.
Okay, but I imagine that this is not a short-term view. I mean, what would be kind of the sort of minimum length we're looking at? I'm sure it would be nice for terms to be going on for a very long time to give recurring revenue and return on investment. But we're looking at a minimum of 5 years, maybe, or 7 years, or 10 years.
Absolutely not. It really depends on the asset class, and particularly the asset life cycle. So you may see infrastructure deals that look at technology that has a much shorter time period before it's naturally refreshed or evolves over time. So let's think about routers, CPE equipment. These are not passive radio towers that sit in situ for 20 years. So in those type of deals, the customers will typically look for a much shorter term to match the life cycle of the asset. We also look at the residual value of those assets, which can support our customers as they're looking through the total cost of ownership of these type of solutions. So Macquarie has a huge history, as I mentioned, in assets, which means we have very specific knowledge, unlike traditional lending institutions, on asset value at its end of life, and that will play a factor there. But there is no minimum. It's very much deal dependent.
Okay, so it's very much dependent on the situation and the customer. But in terms of who is under these models, who is making the decisions about the changes to the infrastructure or to the technology, or even ultimately to the systems and suppliers involved, and how does that factor into the subscription fees as things change?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, in terms of technology decisions, that very clearly always sits with the customer. We're not in the business of design and architecture. We're not in the business of specifying technology solutions. So that's very much within the customer's gift to decide, and we work with them iteratively. So let's look at an example. If we're working with a customer over a longer period, so say it's a 10-year asset, there will clearly be refresh cycles amongst over that time period quite often. They will make the decision about what to refresh and when, and then we'll work with them to ensure that the monthly payment aligns with the benefit they're getting from those refresh cycles. So very much the monthly fee depends on the benefit they're getting and when they realise that throughout the life cycle of the term.
Okay. And obviously this kind of model requires buy-in from all parties. And you will be looking for the best deals that you can get on behalf of the customers and, of course, for yourself. So do you have any existing special relationship with vendors or suppliers that can help with the economics of this model?
No, it's a key principle for Macquarie that we're technology agnostic. And indeed, in my view, the best way to support our customers is to continue to be so. So we have no special relationship, though we do have very good relationships on both the buy and sell side. I work daily with many suppliers out there, but there is no one or no push from us down any one technology path. It's a key principle of ours, and that's something we hold very firm to.
And then from the network operator side, this sounds like it would involve a very big culture shift, and there's a lot of these cultural challenges going on the operator side. Are they ready to embrace this kind of model?
It's a great question, and because with every technology evolution comes a business model shift, and there will always be a difference in pace at which operators will take that up. I would also say the operator pace of take up is impacted by a number of things. So culture is one. Clearly, the shift in their regulatory landscape, external factors such as spectrum auctions, the need to refresh their networks, where they are in their evolution cycle, all play a part in terms of their willingness to move forward. But certainly, I don't think we have a choice in terms of moving to those new business models. And I do see very positive indications that there's significant action ongoing in the vendor side and in the operator side to embrace the change and workshop how these models can work to deliver the connectivity that the landscape needs.
Okay, so are there any existing examples? Because particularly network operators like to look to their peers and see who's done what already and how it's working. So any examples you can point to here?
There's a number of examples that we're aware of. Clearly, the deals that Macquarie work on are commercially confidential. And unlike passive infrastructure deals, which are often the subject of large-scale M&A and are therefore reported in the press, you don't typically see that with the asset financing side of things. But certainly I'm aware of a number of deals and much activity going on in that space.
So, I mean, does this model exist in other vertical sectors, in other industries? And are there any parallels from other sectors to telecoms?
Absolutely, there are. And with the convergence of a number of different sectors, I'd probably point to media at that point, which is an industry that I've worked in and know well. The topics that we're discussing in terms of technology evolution are similar across those sectors. So the move to cloud, if you take the media example, post-production, media management, access services typically were provided on premise and not in the cloud. And there's a very big push within the media sector to hybrid cloud. That has the same challenges as the telco space is facing in terms of technology evolution. It involves legacy assets, it involves new assets, sometimes shared assets, and therefore these models are equally applicable.
So obviously, Macquarie isn't doing this out of the goodness of its heart. There's obviously something big in this for your company. So, what are the outcomes that Macquarie is expecting, and where does the capital come from to finance all of this, and what are the risks in introducing this model?
So individual deal specifics are confidential, as you'll appreciate, but the way I look at our success is based on our customers' success. So if they're succeeding, we're succeeding, and that's what we strive for when we're structuring these deals for them. If you talk about risk, it's a really important topic, not just in financial lending. I'd probably make a parallel actually to the telco space, an area that we know well. The most successful telco projects are those that identify risks upfront, quantify those risks jointly between the supplier and the customer, and then work to mitigate them over time. That's how you drive success out of a deal. The financial structures that we put in place are no different. Where Macquarie's a bit ahead of the game there is that we have that deep asset understanding. So we're able to work with our customers, understand the risks, and then build a solution that caters for those, that works for them, and ultimately delivers what they're looking for.
So separately, Macquarie also has another proposition for our operators, and that's for those that need to swap out their existing technology. What's the nature of that model?
That's a really exciting proposition, actually. And when I joined Macquarie, I've been very passionate and a passionate champion of this for quite some time. Macquarie is unique in that we have that asset capability. And with that, we've provided over $1 billion in remarketing services globally. We transport assets on a daily basis. We have a huge network in the secondary market. And what we're seeing as 5G is deployed and as we go through this new generational wave is a number of areas requiring swap outs that weren't previously expected. So it could be increased competition. We've all talked a lot about Open RAN. We're seeing increasingly operators looking to rebalance their networks, trial Open RAN. That requires the pull out of some equipment. We see full swaps happening. They might be roadmap related. They may just be a vendor choice or a commercial decision from operators. And of course, as we know, we're seeing individual regulatory changes that are requiring operators to move, which is extraordinary in terms of the value of assets that is being pulled out of these networks. And often, rather than having been 3G technology that's been sweated for 15 years, these are almost brand new 4G estates that have huge value. And in a balance sheet constrained environment, I feel it's very important to help the operators monetize those assets. So what we are providing to the operators is a remarketing service. And it is what it says on the tin. We will take end-to-end responsibility for those legacy estates with our specialist asset team. We will take that kit and work with the operators as it's been de-installed, or indeed take an entire estate if it has been. We will asset, log and inventory those estates. And I wouldn't underestimate the importance and difficulty that has. So operators are used to transacting legacy individual assets and items piecemeal. To take an entire estate after a swap and transact that on the secondary market is a huge asset management and logistics task. And operators are not set up for that. And indeed, I think we all want our operators to be focused on the future and rolling out the new technology so that we can benefit from 5G going forward. We have a bespoke asset management tool called Sapphire. It's an integrated CRM and sales tool. So we're able to take all the assets from the operator, implement that into our systems. The assets will go through some natural refurb and refresh as part of that process. And then we go out to the secondary market and sell those assets via our very wide network of brokers, of providers who scrap. So there's always an element of an estate that needs to be scrapped. And also, where we differentiate ourselves really is that we can arbitrage directly for operators with other operators. So via our very wide network, we have 200 salespeople globally that are dedicated to looking after remarketing. We understand what estates are where in their life cycle, and we're able to manage those assets and get them sold on the secondary market for a much higher value than other competitors can in the market.
Okay, and in terms of this model, how does it actually work? I mean, will the operators always get something back, or do they only get something back if you manage to sell it on? And also, the second-hand market isn't new. There's already brokers out there. So how does your proposition here differ from what's already out there?
So in terms of what do the operators get back, absolutely. And actually that's an area that we really differentiate ourselves due to our scale and our pre-existing expertise in assets and infrastructure. We have specialist commercial models that are more tailored to driving the most value to the operator, as opposed to it being a hugely revenue generating exercise just for us. Typically, you'll see in the broker market a revenue share type model, while the deals that we do with our counterparties is clearly confidential. We're certainly proposing a solution that provides the most value back to the operators for those services. So it's a service we provide. It's integrated into our tool set, and we have the specialist expertise to do it. Look, brokers play a really important role in the ecosystem. They've been around for a really long time, and what they do is incredibly important, particularly in areas such as spares management and helping plug manage service gaps. But in order to transact these estates, and I really can't emphasize this enough, there are not brokers that have the capacity to take on a 20,000, a 30,000 radio estate at once and transact it in a programmatic way with an operator. It's much more of a piecemeal approach with brokers. So although that's important, and we have really great partnerships and stakeholders across the broker market that we work with Macquarie, you get an end-to-end solution, which for these estates at this time of significant change and deinstall, I think is highly beneficial for our customers.
Okay, interesting stuff, Amy. Well, it's, the operators are under a lot of pressure to make the most of the money they have and to get the best returns on their investments. So it'll be interesting to catch up as 5G develops and as different network infrastructure models develop, to find out whether any operators are taking you up with your subscription model, and whether they're managing to get rid of their existing or old networks through that remarketing model. So, Amy, great to speak to you today. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Ray.